You guys are a pain in the ass like I am. That's good to hear.
Yes, right?
That's right.
That's the goal?
I'm just curious. When you walk and when you ride your bicycle and you do drive a car, where do you do those three things?
I recognize how much cars are subsidized. People, well, I think that people think, you know, I pay for the car, oh no, railroads are private. Railroads don't all that stuff. And when people yell at you, how much money is going to the transit, how much money is going to railroads subsidized? But my car, oh, it's not subsidized, I pay for my car. Oh, yeah. That's a lot. People don't realize how much cars are subsidized.
What's complain about
Oil. I mean, who pays for that? Don't get me started.
everything.
Everything.
And you know,
Sure it is.
The usage.
We're gonna look at it.
the car you drive is mostly plastic too.
That's true too.
But is it recycled?
Even if I were to switch the wording, that's fine. People think, independent and this government, our new government. You have no roads. What gives me roads? So I think when you say car, just say, hey, I bought my car. That cost me $42,000.
Is it right there now? What budget? Well, usually we just say, leave the key. Turn the lights off. After burn meetings, as they close, like we can just take 5 minutes before they're closing.
Where?
Rudy's. Some places left over inside the station. Everything else closed. It's like, dude, me and Sarah sat there many times and they turned the lights out on us.
I'm on this side, that's Tina's job.
Okay. We do have some continued discussion at this
Yes.
point. Finance Chair and Committee would like to go over a couple of items. So I'm
Yes.
going to turn things back over to our Finance Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. The 3 items that I mentioned earlier tonight that I feel we should discuss before we go further, so that the committee can see where the council is, which is really the whole purpose of this meeting. One item being, let's start with LoSAP. You all received a sheet on LoSAP in your packet, which outlines if we are to give an increase, how much of an increase, what's the actual impact on the budget, and we put in, as a finance committee, the maximum. We did that unanimously. I just wanted to get the sentiments of the rest of the council. If you're okay with that, if you're opposed to that, I think this is the time to have the discussion, because as you can see on your sheet, we're bringing them to the max, but obviously there are other options out there. We can increase them 10%, we can increase them 20%, so on, but any thoughts? I think the committee is together on this, but Council President Palmer, if you want to start.
Yes, I'd like to start. I was not on the committee this year, but I was on the committee last year, and I did support this. Well, Jim, let me just ask you, being that I was on the committee with you last year, is this maximum? Is this what the committee last year had? This was what we recommended last year.
Yes.
Okay.
Unanimously recommended.
I don't remember the exact number, so I just wanted to double check. And I did agree with that recommendation last year, so yes, I do agree with this. I know that it looks like a high increase if you look at the percentage, but if you look at the flat dollar amount from current to this, from the current to what's being proposed as a maximum, the actual dollar amount comes out to about $450 some odd dollars. So
Per person.
Per person, which I don't see that being a huge increase, being that they haven't received an increase in a number of years. And I think we owe them that, and to what Bill was saying before, you know, it's an incentive. These are volunteers, and it's not something I want to do. I, you know, run out of the burning building, and these are people that are running into it. So, you know, I'm just saying, so I think they deserve this, and it's been long overdue. And if we get them to the place that they're supposed to be now, maybe year after year, we just keep them, you know, with the regular increases, then it wouldn't be such a high percentage, and it wouldn't look overwhelming. So I think it's time to just get them where they deserve to be. So yes, I agree with it.
And my understanding then, Councilwoman, and you said this, I want to make sure that I heard you correctly, is that this figure has already been figured in?
Yes, the
Okay.
maximum's figured in the budget.
And when was the last time, do you know when they had an increase in the LoSAP?
I don't think, it was never increased from when it was
put in.
when it was put in.
I look
Right.
at these numbers.
You're correct. And just to remind everybody, it is for firefighters, our volunteer fire department, as well as first aid squad. It's both, as long as they meet the requirements that enable them to get this award. So, and then just Councilman Mearson, Councilman Matthew.
I would support it too, and I want to
Okay.
thank Jim for bringing it up last year and the committee for putting the max in. I support it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I really reiterate my support for it. So then we had a little confusion there. This is gonna be figured in this year's budget, and these guys are gonna get this when?
They'll get this once the budget's adopted. After the budget's adopted, that's when we should have a resolution. We could do it that same night, right? Because the budget gets adopted earlier in the evening. As long as that gets adopted, then later in that same evening, we can have a resolution on the consent agenda authorizing this, and then they would be paid.
Okay, there's a room full of firemen who are under the impression that they'll go for this year. And it's, I want to
Right.
be able to transmit that.
Right, well, that's because too, the LoSAP is paid based on 2013's earnings, so to speak. And so this can actually be applied to that, so, yes.
Yeah. This is definitely, I think this is definitely the least we can do. I don't know if it's necessarily the proper venue to bring this up. I do want to talk about the first aid at some point. I do understand it's suffering from a dearth of volunteers. Part of my ignorance is on this, I don't quite understand how this works in New Jersey. I'm used to the New York model, 911, you know. Here, and this is from my personal experience, my wife fell in the 8th month of her pregnancy at home. Waited a very long time for an ambulance. The cops were there in 30 seconds. Waited for a long time, multiple calls. Ultimately, she suggested, because she was talking, call Cranford. I was in Summit at the time. I beat her to the hospital by about 20, 30 minutes. To the point where they thought I was stalking, like my victim was being brought in, and now they were, I was like, better show ID. If that were a heart attack or something, I'm very concerned about that. And again, it's not, sometimes this can be construed, councilman has personal problem, therefore now everyone has to suffer for it. I want to kind of go under and find out a little bit. I'll talk to Chief Harrelson a bit about it. I think in his day job, part of what his department is doing is the county has ambulances, but I need to understand a little bit about volunteer municipalities, who covers them during the day, and what happens when there's not somebody to cover. Because then you kind of hear broadly these things, mutual aid, and I confess, part of this is my own ignorance on it, and I just need to be educated on it. But that one incident kind of gave me pause, and I just want to know a little bit more about kind of who's going to show up in a medical emergency. The cops, every time I've seen it, it's like seconds. I'm worried more about this, about the medical personnel.
Right. I don't want to stray too far off from, obviously, this is a budget meeting specifically. However, I would just throw this out there, Chief Underhill is a very good resource with that, to have that conversation with. But we can probably discuss this more at another time.
I just
But I understand why you're bringing it up.
Yeah.
So, all right, this is good to know. The full council's in favor of leaving LoSAP in the maximum, so we will do that. Something else, another matter before I turn it over to Warren and Sandy to explain the cap ordinance, was the raises for non-union employees. I just mentioned it earlier as something that we certainly would like to have a council discussion on tonight so that we can best plan for our intentions through the budget. Of course, it doesn't necessarily hold anyone to a certain vote when that time comes, but this is just so that the budget properly reflects the wishes of the council. Like I said earlier, we went back and forth with this a lot. We're leaning towards 1.75% for all non-union staff, which is protected and non-protected. You received a chart on that. You see the numbers totaling up in increments of 0.25% on up to 1.75, which we put as sort of the high, because our two unions are receiving that this year. But that's how the committee feels. I want to hear how everyone else feels. So, Council President, if you want to start that.
Without getting into a whole big discussion about it, I just want to say that I think I can support the 1.75 for, looking at the numbers, I can support it 1.75 across the board for everyone.
Councilman Earstead, Councilman Matthew.
Well, if they have any comments, if they don't have any comments.
Right, of course, they don't want to comment, they don't have to comment, but the idea is to get sentiments from the council
Yeah.
for the
No, I
purpose of
understand.
budgeting.
I understand that. If anybody has any other comments with regard?
Never let it be said I gave a free microphone.
You're
I'm torn. I'm torn because I support it. The concept, I support it. But I know that, unfortunately in this economy, until the banks open up their pockets, no one's getting raises. And I know Jamie Dimon got a big raise, but, no one else is getting it. And so I tend to support it. I'm sure I will, but, I'm torn 1.75. I probably will support it.
Okay.
I got a pretty dangerous statement. Not everybody's getting, you said nobody's getting ready. Nobody's getting ready?
That's a general statement. I'll refine that. A lot of people. I got a question. Whatever happened with the evaluation system that was brought in to replace Best of the Best
Yes,
and longevity?
I'm glad you brought that up, actually. I was planning on putting that in there, but my budget statement at the beginning of the meeting has evolved now from 1.5 pages to four pages, which is fine. But I'm glad you brought that up. That evaluation system's still in place, and the recommendations by the department heads for non-union personnel was 1.75. They all did well in their evaluations, and they were recommended that raise. However, the one exception to that is the planning board secretary. They recommended a higher raise than 1.75%. They recommended it to us in a dollar figure of $300. So that was also taken into consideration as well, but we felt a little more comfortable having 1.75 for everyone being the most equitable we felt. But I'm glad you brought up that point because the evaluations are being done.
And then the solution I would propose, hopefully this would be a compromise that Councilman Ristad, maybe Councilwoman Palmer could get on board with. How about this? If you haven't had a raise in the last year or two, you get a 1.75% raise. If you've gotten a raise last year, especially if you've gotten the one the year before that, you sit it out this year. This is an era of shared sacrifice. We all have to work together. We have to pull together on this. People got to clip their wings a little bit. And I'm here to just let you know, in the private sector, we don't get raises every year. And we're the ones who fund this. And again, I can't say this all the time, when's the last time you made more money than your boss? The bosses are not getting paid as much as the people who are taxing them. And so, particularly the chief of police, we've been told that their contract does not require a raise. So that position has gotten a raise the last 3 years I've been on here. So that one definitely should sit out 1 year. And if you got a raise, if you didn't get a raise last year, especially if you didn't get a raise the year before that, give them 1.75. If you got a raise last year, we're going to ask you, please. The other thing is, for the protected employees, I know the law that we've gotten. Has anyone asked them to take a haircut in the race?
No, not directly.
Okay, because people are sometimes surprised. I know Teresa Quigley, before won a race for several years, there are people who are standing up and saying, hey, I stand in solidarity with the people in my town, with the other employees. I would hope that we don't miss an opportunity to say to somebody, hey, you know, you may be entitled to a raise, would you be willing to forego one for the good of the town and for the good of your fellow employees?
I would just actually like to ask a question. What would you propose then for the planning board secretary who received 0.5% last year, as did the other non-union, non-protected, but was recommended a higher than 0.5% raise? Should she fall in the, you got something last year, so nothing this year? Or, I just, you know, I think it's an interesting compromise to put out, but.
Sarah, I mean, it's a tough call. I don't think you can definitely make a bad answer on that. I could just say, again, someone being in tune with the taxpayers, with the property owners, with the people who pay these bills, it is very difficult for me going door to door, talking to people in financial distress, and they read about raises being given out every year. And they're not getting raises, they're losing jobs, they're taking pay cuts. I'm just telling you, there's a massive disconnect here. And I think this council can really go. And the other thing I'm really against with this 1.75% across the board, this is a backdoor best of the best. That was a bipartisan, Democrat, Republican, unanimous repeal of that ordinance, and I don't want to see that brought in by the back door. We need to struggle with these, and we need to go ahead and parse this and go down and sit down with $200-300, because that's what we're elected to do. If you got a raise last year of 0.5%, you didn't get a raise the year before that?
Don't believe so.
Okay, you know, what I say, that's terrible if they got 1% or 1.7, no, absolutely not. But I think those judgment calls need to be made. The higher paid employees that are not required to get a raise, they've got 3 raises in a row, at least, come on.
Well, I definitely appreciate the council's comments on this tonight, and, you know, I'm glad that I brought it up tonight too, because the finance committee has wrestled with this. We've gone back and forth a lot, like I've said, so it is nice to take an opportunity like this at a meeting specifically for the budget to hear what everybody has to say. So I want to say I appreciate that. And also, Mayor, do you have anything on those 2 items to add before I go to the third one? Or?
I've already commented basically on LoSAP, having been around when it was put in, and finding out that in 14 years there hasn't been an increase in that is a little bit disgusting. So of course, you know, I would have to say, you know, it's reasonable. With regard to the projected salary increases, I'm undecided. We'll have to think about things a little bit more, but, and I would really like to reserve my comments
Okay.
on why I'm saying
I
that.
just didn't want to pass anyone by either, but thank you, Mayor. Then the final item I have is the cap ordinance. I'll turn it over to Sandy and Warren to basically explain that. Like I said, some of you may have reached out to one or both of them about this before this meeting, but for the benefit of the public as well as everybody up here, I think it would be nice to hear their thoughts on where we're at in terms of that ordinance that's on for introduction tonight.
As a municipality, you're subject to 2 caps, okay? One's the 2010 tax levy cap that puts a limitation on how much you can raise the tax levy. And then there's another cap that's on the spending side, the appropriation side. That's what everyone's basically kind of talking, you know, legals up, different appropriations up. So the limitation on the appropriation side, that's the 1977 cap, because that's when it was instituted. It originally started at 5%, and now it's at 2.5%. So the way the law reads, you could increase your appropriations, your operating appropriations basically, over the previous year by not more than 2.5%, or what they call the cost of living adjustment. Or it's like, it's your, you know, index rate ordinance, or it's your inflation rate. This year, the inflation rate that's, comes out every year from the states, based on the federal government's index rate, it's 0.5 of 1%, so it's very low. So even though the state law says you can go up 2.5, it's the lesser of the two. It's either the 0.5 of 1% or the 2.5. Now, since the COLA ordinance is less, that's what you're stuck with. Now, you can exceed that to 3.5, it's in the law, if you do what they call the COLA ordinance, which I think you might have a copy of it in front of you. So if you pass that, you could increase your operating appropriations up to 3.5%. Now, if you don't go up to the 3.5%, you can bank the difference. This year, since the cost of living adjustment, the COLA rate is so low at 0.5 of 1%, your operating appropriations can only go up to $28,900, which is very low. You know, and that's where if you had a bank in the prior year, the bank does not actually raise any money in the current year. It just gives you the capacity to raise your operating appropriations in the subsequent year. Last year, the index rate ordinance was introduced. It did fail. I think the bank that we were talking about at the time is approximately $92,000. So since it failed, there is no bank for 14. So you would take your $28,000 plus your bank in the prior year. If it was the $90,000, you would add the two together. But there is no bank. So we're limited now to the $28,943, unless you go to the 3.5%. Okay? The budget that you have in front of you, this budget is up on the operating appropriations approximately $177,000 on the appropriation side. That's the legal, salaries and wages, health insurance, add all the increases, you know, minus the decreases, whatever, there were some decreases that Jim mentioned. But it's still up on the operating side, $177,000. The COLA rate by law is only $28,000. So now you have to come up with $144,000 to adopt this budget. Now, when this budget goes down to the state's gonna look, and they're gonna say if you're cap compliant, tax levy cap, appropriations cap. If you're not, they won't approve your budget for adoption. So you need to pass the, what I'm saying is the COLA ordinance. You have to come up with the capacity of $144,000 more. If you don't, you can't get out of this with surplus. Surplus you can, you know, get under the tax levy cap. For this, you have to cut the expense side to get there. There's no revenue offset with this, there's nothing to do. We're talking all appropriations on this side of the cap. So the budget's increased by 177 on the operating side. Your capacity without any ordinance is only 28,009. You're over the cap, the way this budget is 144,900. So either you're gonna cut or you're gonna do the 3.5%. If you do the 3.5%, it gives you capacity of approximately 173, which is in excess of the 144, and then the difference you'll bank if you need it for in 2015. What's really hit all the municipalities statewide is that the rate of inflation has been very, very low. 0.5 of 1% is like next to nothing. I mean, the raises you were just talking about, 175. You know what I mean? Legal's up, health insurance is up, everything's up more than 0.5 of 1%. So how do you get under your spending cap with those type of increases? So that's what's important about the cap this year. If you don't pass this cap, you gotta go back and somehow reduce it by $144,000. I know referendum was mentioned. You can't go to the referendum unless you do the COLA ordinance first. If you go down to the state and say you want to do it, they're going to say, well, did you do the COLA ordinance first? In other words, because if you only need 3%, why do you need the referendum? So if you don't do that, I don't think they're going to even consider the referendum. They say, well, you can get yourself out of this jam by doing the COLA rate ordinance first. Same thing with surplus. There is a mechanism in the law. You can take surplus and offset appropriations and put that outside of cap. But a criteria for that, you go out to the local finance board and ask for that. But they're going to ask if you did the index rate ordinance. Because they're going to say, well, why do you need us if you can do it yourself? You know, even if it fails, they're going to say, go back and at least try to consider it. They're not going to let you do what you can do by yourself. So, I mean, it's very critical this year to understand there is no bank in the prior year. The index rate is very low. It's only 1%, it's 28,000. You're over by 144. So the budget is introduced. You're going to have to, you know, consider hard passing the index rate ordinance this year. If you have any questions, I'll ask. I mean, it's just where you are. Because there is no bank. We haven't passed the bank ordinance or the COLA rate ordinance in the last 2 years, so there's no bank left.
If I could add to that a little bit, I have to say, when I first heard all this, it really baffled my mind. Here we are with a budget before us with a 1.2% increase, and it's the best budget the town's seen in 12 years, yet we're in a situation where if this is not passed, now we have to go back to the drawing board and cut $150,000. If we do that, of course, LoSAP, 16th officer, redevelopment, it would all get cut. I think that would have to be the first, as they are really discretionary. But not to use that to scare anyone at all, I think there is this notion out there that by passing this, we will enable ourselves to spend more than this budget we have before us tonight by $150,000. That's not the case. We're not looking to do that. The budget you have before you tonight is what we're looking to have with everyone's support. So if this passes and that doesn't, this really can't pass. So I know Warren, I think you explained it very nicely for us. I appreciate it. For me, it's the second time, third time even really hearing it. So it's kind of sunk in a little bit more, but I would urge you, if you have any questions about this for Warren and Sandy, this would probably be the time to ask.
I thank you. I'd like to thank Sandy. I did call her last year when it was the first time that I looked at this and I didn't understand it, and she was kind enough to explain it to me as she was again this time, because everything that we talked about last year just kind of left in my mind. But one of the notes I did make was, just to reiterate what Councilwoman Tedisco said, was this is not increasing our budget, it's just letting us spend what is currently in our budget. Correct?
Right.
And one of the things that I did, because I took some notes here, you're saying that, sorry, I missed my page. Currently, if we don't adopt this, if we don't pass this, we would only be allowed to increase our operating budget by $28,000. So I believe that currently in this budget, $24,000 is just, our bulk program is just $24,000 alone. Now, granted, we have our revenue coming in for our bulk program, but they don't consider that.
Revenue has nothing to do.
Agreed, I understand
It's the
that.
appropriations side,
It's
yes.
appropriations only, so
That's
even
right.
though we have revenue to offset our bulk program, the bulk program is gonna eat the
If you
$28,000.
had $5 million in surplus, it wouldn't help you at all. It would do
Agreed.
absolutely nothing. You can make taxes, you can do a tax decrease, but you still would not be able to adopt
So,
this budget.
So, and other, we have other revenues like court fees and permit fees and planning board to offset, other items in here, so to me, it's almost like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't we adopt this and let us spend the budget that we're looking to adopt?
Yeah, because it's just the rate is so low, 1.5% to 1%. See, last year was 2%, the year before was 2.25%. So you were getting 100,000, 140,000 by itself. This year it's only 28 grand, just because of the number, the rate of inflation is just so extremely low. That's what's really happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then not having a bank in the prior years is not going to help.
Okay.
If I can ask a question too, to tag along on that. I think I've spoken to you about this, but are there other towns you know of that have not passed, or entities, because it's not just towns that face this, but entities that have not passed their captions?
It's funny, on the tax levy cap, the banking is automatic. Whatever you don't, like, right now, the tax levy cap, you're under the tax levy cap approximately $90,000. That's automatic. You can bank that for the next 3 budget cycles if you need it. But the spending cap, for some reason, it's not automatic. You have to pass the ordinance to do it, to use that capacity for the next, it's only for the next 2 years. So for some reason, one is automatic and one's not. So, but mostly everybody just passes it automatically, just to give them, if they do need it, this is the year everybody is needing the bank, because the initial rate is just extremely low.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, thank you very much for that. And I talked to Sandy about this for quite a while today. and I respect your professional opinions. I think this is where the professional kind of meets the political on this a bit. I just want to make a comment. Low inflation is good news everywhere except government. I mean, you're paying 0.5% more than you were last year. I don't understand, but we don't like it because it cuts back on our spending priorities. Usually you say inflation's low. I remember in the 70s, inflation was, high inflation used to be a bad thing, but I guess now we've come full circle. The other thing, and to your comment, Ann, I see what it is you're saying vis-a-vis this budget, if we were reviewing this budget in a vacuum. To me, and I've expressed this to the CFO, this is the culmination of poor and profligate spending decisions of prior councils come home to roost. Why fight for a zero for 1 year in the PBA contract? Why fight for a zero in the DPW? Come on, you're gonna get sued and you're gonna get people angry at you. This is why you fight for it. Also, to go ahead and say the 16th officer, LoSAP, and other things are at risk, well, you're picking and choosing different things. We've chosen to jack up our debt. We have chosen to increase our spending. And even with this, we're still considering raises. That boggles my mind. That boggles my mind. I mean, has anyone in this room now had a supervisor say, you deserve a raise, but the company didn't make money this year? You know what I mean? We're still considering raises, and we have this problem. It just shows me that, again, I think this council has a disconnect of its priorities with the taxpayers and the property owners, the people who fund this. It would be a no-brainer, but it seems to me it's almost like, hey, we in government created a really bad situation, and if you guys don't remedy it, you're the problem. Well, I actually point to the problem coming up to this. That's the problem. And, we got 0.5% inflation. Again, in most sectors, that's good news. This is really our profligacy come home to roost. And then the final thing I want to wrap up, and this is the most important thing. Mayor, this was, I think, a major accomplishment of your administration. You broke the tie on this the last 2 years. We got rid of the cap bank. As you heard Warren say, hardly anyone's done this. Democrats and Republicans came together, led by you, to get rid of the cap bank. I wonder where you stand on this, because to me, this would really be rescinding a major achievement of your administration.
I have to view this from the position of, at this point in time, what is in the best interest of the borough without going into detail that I'm not at liberty to discuss right now. So I need to make sure that certain major expenses would be funded. And I'm just gonna, at this point, leave it at that, and as time goes on, maybe I'll be able to expand on it, but right now, I think the budget is a prudent one, and there are certain expenses that have been included that we need to protect the residents from even a harder hit to make at this time. And I'm just going to leave it at that. That's my answer. And
Mayor?
yes.
I almost said this a few minutes ago, and then I just backed off. This is probably where Jim and I differ the most, okay, in thinking. And the general comment about, low inflation is good. Don't tell that to the seniors who are living on a fixed income, who just got what? Do you know what they got this past year, Warren?
Almost nothing.
Almost
I got
nothing.
almost nothing.
You talk about the residents of the community. Seniors living on fixed incomes, Jim, who also voted, they aren't real happy about what they got, and that's because of low inflation. I don't know what anybody's getting in a bank. It's almost better to put it under your mattress with what banks are getting. My deferred comp, my IRAs. It's all good and well to say that the low inflation is good, and I understand it is. You certainly don't want where we were in the 80s. I had a 14% mortgage on the house, so I understand that, but 0.5. I voted against this last year, and it didn't affect us, in my mind. And I don't regret that vote, but that's because, as you indicated, COLA was 2%. 0.5 would hurt this community tremendously. And where it would hurt, Jim, when you follow it all through, is it's not a matter of government. I mean, you and I, not getting into the big picture, I think it's where the big macroeconomics of what the private sector has done in running everything overseas, and the 1% versus 99%, and who we're really hurting when we sit here as a council and don't give our fellow workers sick days, don't give our fellow workers prevailing wage, don't give our fellow workers a decent raise. You and I are totally on different ends of the rainbow on that. And this year I will support this, okay, because to only have $28,000 buffer increase, what have you, would take away the services. And I don't support taking away the services of this community, because people who you said left this town, they couldn't afford it. Well, if you can afford it, you're getting something for your money, it's worth it. But if you take it to the point where you reduce your taxes so much, and if that becomes your overriding concern, that you have no services, there's no Garwood, there's no town, I don't want to go that route. So I do intend to support that this year.
Are we at that point?
I
don't think we're in the.
No, you gotta look at it well.
Any other comments? Any other comments or questions for Warren? No? I'm good. No, you're all good? Okay, those are your 3 items?
Yes, that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Moving along, there are no minutes this evening, no communications. We're going to move right to the introduction of the ordinance. Please read Ms. Ariano, ordinance 14-05 by title only. Now, I just want to remind everyone this is an introduction.
Calendar year 2014 model ordinance to exceed the municipal budget appropriation limits and to establish a cafe in accordance with NJSA 4-45.14.
May I have a motion to introduce ordinance 14-05?
I'll make a motion to introduce that ordinance, Mayor.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, Ms. Ariano.
Council President Palmer.
Yes.
Councilman Martin. Councilman Martin. Roll call. Councilman Martin.
Catherine, yes.
Councilman Matthew.
No.
Councilman Neersted.
Yes?
Councilman Petrozelli.
Aye.
And Councilwoman Tedisco.
Aye.
Thank you. There are no committee reports. There are no officer reports. I would like to open the meeting up to public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address mayor and council? Please step to the microphone, state your full name and address. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. It would be greatly appreciated.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Bruce Patterson, 335 Blue Avenue, and I must say, I'm happy with basically all I've heard tonight. 2.5 hours of dissecting and explaining and coming out with an increase of 1.21. I mean, I did say, can we keep it under 2%? There were no promises, but you did well. And although I'm never happy.
Like I said.
I'm begrudgingly happy.
I agree with
You don't have
you.
your budget t-shirt on?
Yeah,
I do.
But I'm saving my particular questions in the normal format that I do when I email it and get it back, and I'll keep it short as possible when I do send it to you. But I mean, I do have just some general questions that hopefully some people can answer. The total tax increase, what is that, around $80,000? You said it was $45 a house, $1,600 a house.
So, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I know it's not.
We'll close it out, you wait a
Warren,
second.
do
You should have rolled it out before I came up.
Should know better
you
than
should know
Warren.
better than that, right?
Actually, this happened, I don't know, what it was, about 5 or 6 years ago, I asked this question, and nobody had an answer. I was just beside
It'd be
myself.
about 65,000? Was it 5.6 million is the tax base?
$44 a household is what I did.
So 67,490,
Was that, I said
7,000.
490.
Is the pension funding, or our pension obligations, is that up to date? Totally funded right now? Because I know the last couple of years, there was like a increasing of obligation to the taxpayers that we have to cover our costs. I mean, right now, we're totally funded.
Are you referring to the deferral or?
Yeah, there was deferrals leading up. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. No, that other. We were underfunded, the town, in the PERS, and I guess the FRS at the same time. And there was a catch-up, I think 2011, 2012. I guess at this point, we are fully funded, Garwood.
We're not playing catch-up
Well,
yet.
there's no, whatever the bills that are due April 1st are in this budget. So whatever the state gave us, that's what's in there.
Right,
Which
right.
was a decrease, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, it's supposed to go down. There was some talk, there was, your local finance notice came down. The bills that are out that were due April 1st are actually supposed to decrease based on the governor's budget. Now, those amended numbers are not out yet. The states say use the numbers you have for April 1st, but supposedly they're supposed to go down even more.
Yeah, the rates that the state was doing, I mean, do they fluctuate? I mean, next year could be up.
Yeah, well, like, they were down the last 2 years, so.
I'm sorry to interrupt, that was even further than the numbers we're seeing?
Yeah, the numbers you have now, matter of fact, a lot of municipalities paid it, but a local finance notice came out last week and said, based on the governor's budget, pension bills could in effect go down, and trying to rework the numbers right now. I have no idea, I mean, down, that could be $100, I don't know what that is at this point in time. But they're saying not to wait, they're saying use the numbers that you have April 1st, and then I'll make the adjustment when the numbers come out.
Certainly, they're probably referring to the proposed full pension payment.
I guess,
Okay.
probably right, but
That's
that's why
great,
those numbers.
that's fabulous.
We'll go down even further.
I find this a propitious time, by the way, that Paul is recording. It's not really a historic budget meeting, but this is one good budget meeting, and I'm glad it's going to be on video on the internet.
Used to the camera.
Well, they should wait to the camera. You know, they did all the work. Which, thank you very much for doing all the work, all the professionals and committee. Oh, yeah, just a quick one.
We only have
The
two.
band, okay, the bands, you know, you're talking about you have bands. Isn't there like a life of the band? They can only last maybe 7 years and then they have to go
10
full
years.
bonding?
Yeah, 10 years.
10 years, oh, 10 years. And you're talking about max, back in 2000, when LoSAP first came up, I was probably the lone resident actually pushing for LoSAP. Even the council was fighting, and I don't know if you were on council at that point.
No, I wasn't fighting, I was.
I don't know, the council was
Supported that.
I don't call them fighting.
was resisting. It was resisting, and I kind of pushed for it, and I was happy to get something for the volunteers. I mean, they do deserve it. Now we're looking at some kind of COLA increase of $450 over 1,000. You know, that's like around 40%, 45%. And yes, they hadn't gotten some kind of increases over the last 14 years. But we're here talking about employee raises and chief of police raises, and there's some argument and resistance back and forth. But meanwhile, you're doing this COLA of like around a 40% jump. I mean, 30, what is it?
38.7.
38.75% jump. If you're talking about raises, no raises, then this COLA increase, well, you know, 14 years, why don't you just do 14 years times 2%, that's 28%, and at least you won't be going to the max, but you will be giving them something that they deserve. I don't see why you have to go to the max, especially if you're arguing back and forth over raises for non-contractual employees. I mean, it seems to be duplicitous a little bit, or contradictory. And just one last item, or I didn't bring it up here, but you know, the ordinance that's the appropriations, increasing the appropriations, where was that sheet of paper here? Exceed the municipal budget appropriation limits and to establish a cap bank. I listened to it and I understand fully exactly what Warren was talking about, but my question is, looking at this, you can do a COLA ordinance and you can do a cap bank ordinance, it seems. It seems like both of these are combined. And to me, it looks like you can split them up, do the COLA ordinance, and still vote, break out a cap bank ordinance and then vote no on that. So I don't know if that's possible, but then you can continue on with your record-setting 3 votes in a row of denying a cap bank ordinance. Because to me, I don't see the reason for a cap bank ordinance except for the purpose of increasing taxes on the taxpayers. So vote for the COLA ordinance, but not for the cap bank ordinance. Thank you.
Any other comments with regard to anything? There's saying none. From the public, we'll move along.
Maybe they want to answer Bruce's question about the separating out that one, when he was talking
You have
about,
an answer? Are you
Captain.
prepared for an answer?
Hmm?
Are you prepared to give them an answer?
I'm not, but I think that Warren could speak to that while he's here, anyway.
I'm sorry.
I think he could say it a lot better than I could.
Do you
because-
have an answer to
Do you have an answer
Bruce's
to
comment?
that?
I really have to check with the state on that. I mean, I think you can actually do that, but I mean, let me check if we can
Okay.
split it out. But I think last year we just had the bank ordinance, because
Right.
you didn't need the index rate, so we just went to the bank. Let me ask you, see if you can break the 2 out.
Okay.
I need
Definitely,
to
yes.
interject that though. I don't know if there'll be time to.
I don't, well, see, that's the thing, it's already
Ordinance
introduced, so
adopted
it's
the budget,
it's
so
out
I
there, I
don't
don't, you know.
As I understand it, it has to be adopted before we
Before the,
introduce?
no, before the budget's adopted,
Okay.
because they won't let you adopt the budget unless time's
Okay.
passed.
I'll
We have
write it
time,
down.
we have time for
No, we
that.
have time.
Okay.
But,
All right.
if it didn't get adopted, then the budget's.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you what, I would definitely vote for that compromise. I would definitely vote for that compromise.
Okay. One item that we do have is an item on the consent agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the consent agenda, Mayor.
Do I have a second? Discussion. Roll call, please, Ms. Ariano?
Council President Palmer?
Aye.
Councilman Martin? Councilman Matthews?
Aye.
Councilman Niersted?
Yes.
Councilman Petrozelli?
Aye.
And Councilwoman Disco?
Aye.
Not in business, I have already discussed tonight, more time?
I told you to put that on there because.
Yeah, I know, I'm going down the line, I'm afraid I went to something I need to. Okay, no claims, none, adjourned. The regular meeting of the mayor and council will be held on Tuesday, March 11, 2014, in council chambers at 7:15 p.m. Workshop session to start at 7. There will be a public hearing in council chambers on ordinance number 14-05 on Tuesday, March 25, 2014, at 7:15 p.m. or soon thereafter. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So,
Second.
we're gonna meet up with the bill, with the